This is Popular Front, a podcast focused on the very niche and kind of geeky details of modern warfare with me, Jake Hanrahan. Today we're speaking to Wladimir van Wilgenburg. I was going to have someone else on this week, but then President Trump in the US suddenly decided that he was going to pull all of the US troops out of Syria, which, is a big deal. I thought you lot would want to hear about this. Now, Trump has decided to pull them out kind of rapidly. I think they're going to be pulling out in 60 to 100 days, which means big problems for the YPG, the Kurdish-backed forces in Northeast Syria, also known as Rojava. The YPG are considered the best fighting force for the US to be allied with in Syria, fighting ISIS. Trump has said, it's mission accomplished, ISIS are finished in Syria. That's not true. The YPG are still fighting ISIS in Hajin Pocket, still fighting ISIS in Deir ez-Zor. So I got Vlad on to talk about the situation. He was in Northeast Syria last week. He was in Rojava, and Vlad is unapologetically pro-YPG, sure, but this guy speaks fluently 2 Kurdish languages. He's probably been in Rojava more than any other journalist that I can think of, so I think what he's got to say is definitely relevant. You don't have to take it on board, but he will give you an idea of the situation that's probably going to unfold now that Turkey are very likely going to invade Northeast Syria. Apologies, the sound is bad on this, but we had to do it quick and had to do it over the phone. So Vlad, why do you think Trump has decided to do this now?
So I think for some reason he felt like let's just pull out of Syria and get over with this mess, and sort of ISIS is defeated, and let it be the problem for Syria, Iraq, and the regional actors. Let them deal with these problems. But I think the reality is that the U.S. credibility in the region will be completely damaged. And I think maybe it's a very wrong comparison, but it somehow reminds me when I was reading books about the Roman Empire. When the Roman Empire was crumbling, and I think we are basically witnessing this decision of Trump to withdraw from Syria. I think this is like one of probably in the history books, it will be one of the first signs of the decline of Western influence in the region and in the Middle East. And I think for Russia, this situation is perfect. For Assad, it's perfect. For Iran, it's perfect. I think Turkey thought it was perfect, but I think for Turkey, probably a phased withdrawal would have been better than a sudden withdrawal. I think also is going to create problems for Turkey, actually.
Why? What do you think is going to happen now?
Well, I think the problem now is it's difficult for anyone in the region now to see what's exactly going to happen. If the area of the northeast of Syria, of Rojava, will come under, for instance, Damascus control after an agreement, then basically all the focus of the Syrian government and the Russians will be on the Turkish-controlled zone. So there will be much more pressure on Turkey to do something about those jihadists that they were supporting in Idlib and in other areas. So I think it's a very complicated situation also for Turkey, how to deal with the sudden withdrawal, because, even the Americans themselves, they didn't expect this to happen. Remember that James Jeffrey, the new Syria envoy, they had this policy to stay in Syria, to deny Damascus access to these oil and gas resources in the northeast of Syria, to push Iran to leave Syria. But this whole policy now is in shambles. Like, the West has no more policy in Syria now, it's done. All this fantasy about Geneva talks and whatever, it's done. Like, they have no more leverage at all after the US is gone. And I think it's also very difficult for the UK or France, which also have troops in Syria, to do something to stop this chaos and to stop this instability.
Yeah, it is chaos. That is the right word. Like we were saying earlier, you were in Syria, in Rojava, Northeast Syria last week. What was the situation like? How did people feel? Were they kind of arming up? Because, the Turkish troops were massing on the border. No one was sure if they would invade or not, but surely they were kind of taking measures to stop that.
Well, of course, the Kurdish fighters, they were massing along the border. They were checking the borders because there were a lot of rumors that Turks were removing the walls. But there was never really any sign of that. But they were checking, the YPG was checking all the time the walls, if there was any changes.
The blast walls?
No, not the blast walls, because Erdogan built his own wall to keep the Syrians out of Turkey.
Oh, the border.
He basically, before Trump, he built his own wall. I think Trump is probably very jealous of Erdogan. So basically, I feel in Tel Abyad, Serikani, everybody, that's why I went to Serikani and Tel Abyad at that time to see if there was any change in the walls. But actually, there was no sign at all. And when I was looking with my mobile phone, making pictures of the other side of the Turkish border in Tel Abyad, the only thing I could saw was a lot of vans of, I think, Turkish journalists. So there was not a huge sign. But the people in Kobani, they were afraid, like less people are going to the shops. People were saving up more money just in case if they will become a refugee. So people were worried in Kobani, and especially now in Syria, everybody's very worried what's going to happen next. Nobody knows what the direction it is going to. So at that time, also people are afraid. I mean, I remember a shopkeeper was complaining that he lost like 2/3 of his customers because people were not going out anymore to buy a kebab in his place. So I think definitely that people were afraid. And I mean, there was also a Turkish shelling before that, I think in October, 1-2 months before that. And then also people are afraid that Turkey would invade. So I think it's, that was the situation. But then when I visited the border, I saw not much was going on, and there was not really a sign that Turkey was going to invade. But now, of course, we don't know if there's going to be an invasion or not.
Yeah, well, the Turkish government said immediately we're going to bury the YPG in ditches.
Yeah. So now the situation is a little bit different, so, yeah.
And what kind of chance do you think the YPG has against, Turkish military if they move in? You think it will turn into a guerrilla war like in southeast Turkey with the PKK?
I don't know what's going to happen in Turkey, but of course, if Turkey is going to really attack the Kurds from Syria, we don't know. I mean, it could be possible that there would also be fighting inside Turkey, but I mean, there was already a fight between the Kurds in Turkey and the Turkish state, between the PKK and the Turkish state. So remember what happened to all those Kurdish cities that were destroyed in the urban warfare. So I mean, it's not like I don't think PKK can do much apart from insurgent attacks. They cannot really. I mean, they can make it more difficult, the life more difficult for the Turkish army. But I think, I think it's difficult to say basically. But
yeah,
of course the PKK could do that. I think there was some Russian news report that's quoted a PKK official, but I'm not sure even if that report is true because Russian media is not very reliable often.
Yeah, there's a lot of bullshit going around at the minute. That definitely makes me think of, there's this claim I keep seeing, people saying, YPG are threatening to release 3,200 ISIS prisoners. Now, to me, that seems outrageous. These are the people that, raped and killed their brothers and sisters. But Vlad, do you think there's any validity to that statement that people are coming out with?
Well, what I was hearing from one of my friends in Kobani was saying that the people, civilian people, so I'm not talking about YPG, they're asking the YPG to return to the Kurdish cities, defend them, and to withdraw from Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor and just leave all those ISIS people, just leave them, don't care about them, leave them, who cares, get rid of them, give them to the regime, let them go to ISIS, do whatever they want.
Right.
But this is not like an official, there's no official YPG policy or SDF policy that are saying that. Maybe there were some people that had this idea, but there's no decision like that, But I mean, if the West is dropping the YPG and they don't do anything to protect them, why they would not hand over these ISIS women and children and fighters to the regime, for instance? Why would they not just let them go back to ISIS? I mean, I don't see what would be another, if they, for instance, will be forced to protect themselves against a Turkish attack, then I don't see why they wouldn't give them, for instance, to the regime or let them go or find another solution, because they will need all the resources to protect themselves against the Turkish state. And I think if Turkey attacks, then there will be a very big chance that the YPG would withdraw Deir ez-Zor and Raqqa area and maybe leave local fighters there to protect the border against ISIS.
Yeah.
So then it would be a very chaotic situation. And also it's very difficult there used to be a lot of NGO workers in some Kurdish cities like Kobani. It was one of the most safest towns. You could have a drink there, have a beer in Kobani, which is not possible in the areas under Turkey. I mean, of course, the regime, it was very difficult for foreigners to go there without a Syrian regime visa. So this was going to be all gone. Those foreigners, they're probably thinking of leaving Syria. And actually, the American diplomats are working in the region. Actually, I already sort of got the feeling that something was going on, because actually someone asked me, is it true that NGO workers are asked to leave the Americans? And this was before it was in the Wall Street Journal, before it was in the media. I already sort of had the idea before that something was going on, something was weird, because I got questions from people that heard that Americans are asking the NGO workers to leave Syria. So at that time it was already a little bit the sign that maybe something was going on. And then an official asked me, so is this the same like what happened in Afrin when the Russians left Afrin? But at that point, there was a lot of confusion, and my Kurdish contact was saying, no, this is just NGOs. They're like very worried. Someone else said maybe this is because of Christmas, that they're Americans, they go away for Christmas. But then, it started to become more serious, and then the reports came out, and then, all the chaos started.
Yeah. I saw some reports earlier that YPG or PYD delegation have gone to have a meeting with the regime in Damascus. What do you think the regime can even offer them at this stage?
Well, the best thing that the regime, the Syrian government can offer the Kurds is to protect the border against Turkey. So if they would send troops to the border of Turkey to stop a possible Turkish attack, but that only works if Russia supports this, because otherwise it would still be possible for Turkey to attack. For instance, also what they could do, for instance, to have the YPG fighters or the SDF put like on a Syrian uniform, and then as a sort of border force protect the border for Damascus, and also to protect the Kurds against a potential attack. But we remember that when Russia demanded the Kurds to hand over the Kurdish city of Afrin to Damascus, when Turkey was threatening to attack Afrin, if you remember that stage, then it was very basically Damascus demanding a full control of Afrin, and that all the fighters hand over their weapons and everything to the Syrian army. So I'm not sure. I think Damascus is going to ask for a very heavy price for this return. And of course, I don't think the Kurds will have any problem giving all the oil fields, gas fields, dams, major resources, for instance, Ramallah, a town on the border where there's oil, to give them to Damascus. I don't think they'll have an issue with that. But I don't think they want to have like a full return of the Syrian government back with the intelligence service, with military recruitment, arresting people for certain things. I don't think they want that. But I think like before, when the Americans were still in Syria, like the Kurds had like a very strong negotiation position. But now
it's nothing.
I think the situation is, now it's like almost nothing. So that's why this is like a major victory for Iran, for Russia. I mean, this is like the complete destroy of the Western credibility in the region, that they just leave their partners. And yeah, this is like a big turning point, I think.
Are you shocked that this happened now?
Well, I'm shocked because, I mean, some people say why you're shocked is because, okay, Trump, he wanted to withdraw, but there was like a lot of resistance, for instance, from Mattis, from State Department, from the U.S. Army, that saw the SDF and the YPG one of the best partners they have ever had in the fight against jihadists, like secular partners that don't shoot you in the back, like what always happened in Afghanistan. So I think it was a shock because like he just withdrew suddenly, like versus like for instance he appointed the Syria envoy, and the Syria envoy James Jeffrey said we're going to stay in Syria for an indefinite period of time until the Iranians leave and until we find a political solution in Syria. And then suddenly Trump comes with an announcement. He said we're going to pull out from Syria completely. So Trump, he doesn't care about foreign policy. He just wants to focus on building his wall and focus on domestic issues in the U.S. He doesn't want to get involved so much in foreign wars. So yeah, I think even Obama, he didn't want, even President Obama, former President Obama, didn't want to get so much involved in foreign interventions. But I think Trump takes it up a notch, like he goes even further. And also, I don't understand why some people are now saying that maybe this is going to mean there will be a war against Iran, because some people are saying that Mattis was sort of a balance in the administration against a more aggressive policy towards Iran. But I don't think that Trump would support such a thing to send now instead of, because he's talking about withdrawing troops from Afghanistan, he's talking about, he's already withdrawing from Syria. So I don't think Trump is going to do a war with Iran or something. I don't know why people are saying that.
No, I don't either. So also the France and the UK have said, we're going to stay behind, as part of the global coalition against ISIS. But I can't see that will last very long without the US. I don't think it will be very, useful. But what do you think? What do you make of that? France saying they're going to stay and the UK is saying they're going to stay.
Well, it would be good if European countries would take more responsibility to protect their interests, but I think it's going to be difficult because if there's no more U.S. air power, and the whole coalition against ISIS is built on that, like the French and the British are very dependent on the Americans in Syria to stay there, So if the Americans are not there anymore, like how the French or the British are going to do that, like how they can do this by themselves. So I think it's going to be very difficult unless they make, for instance, the decision to send much more troops to Syria. But there's a very short time frame, and it's not that like France or UK, they're not like a country like Russia that is led by one person. They cannot just make a decision to just suddenly send like a lot of more troops. Like has to be like a mutual consensus between the British Parliament and the British government, and in the France it's the same. It's not so easy. I mean, I think in the French public is in support of the Kurds of Syria, and they want them to survive. In the UK, I'm not very much aware about the public debate so much, but I think it's difficult. Like unless they send like a lot of more troops and also support those troops with air power. I mean, I'm sure also that the France have jets and the Brits also, but it's going to be like very complicated because it's a very limited time frame. Like they're talking about 60 to 100 days. So like, yeah, it's still up in the air,
That's really not a lot of time.
Yeah, there's so like, that's why everybody knew that Trump at some point would probably leave. Although some people are saying, they were also saying about Afghanistan, they would leave and they never left. But I think that argument is now completely done because of Trump. But I think it's very difficult to see. I see like things changing. So like if, for instance, US would have stayed longer for 2 years, then there could have been maybe some deal with Turkey, have like a peace deal with Damascus or something like that, and the Kurds maybe could have got something out of this mess. But now I think it's going to be very difficult, and that's why I think probably the best option the Kurds now have is Damascus. But at the same time, today there are talks between the French president and two leaders, Riyad Darar and Ilham Ahmed from the Syrian Democratic Council. They're meeting the French president today, so we're going to see how that's going to work out.
Okay. I mean, I hate to be so kind of doom and gloom, but do you think this is potentially kind of the beginning of the end for the Rojava project in Northern Syria?
I'm not sure. I mean, it's not completely over. Like they also have things to offer to Damascus. I mean, they could have actually offer manpower to Damascus, because all those SDF forces, for instance, they could be somehow integrated into the Syrian Arab army, and they could, for instance, help Assad of taking back, for instance, Idlib or Afrin or Azaz or Jarbulus from the Turks and the jihadists. So it's not full gloomy. There's still a possibility that, for instance, with Russia and Damascus, they can reach some form of agreement. But it's not like the same as in the past. The autonomy would be very limited. Maybe I think in the past, Assad, I don't think it's possible for Assad. I don't think he's going to make a lot of concessions. So I think the situation is quite gloomy, but still we don't know what exactly going to happen. It also depends on negotiations between Damascus and the Kurds. And also maybe there will be pressure on Trump to stay longer, but we don't know that yet. But I think the situation is quite grim now for the Syrian Kurds, and I think in the region that most likely, as it looks now, that only the Iraqi Kurds until now, although their situation is also not perfect, to maintain their autonomy in the region.
And maybe you can give us an idea of what will happen if the Turks do invade, like they say they're going to. What do you think will happen? Because Iraq really can't handle any more refugees. What do you think? What's the worst case scenario?
Well, I think if Turkey invade, there's probably going to be a huge refugee crisis again. I think most of those Kurds will most likely not try to go to Turkey, but flee, for instance, to the Kurdistan region of Iraq. And the Kurdistan region already hosts around 200,000 Syrian Kurds, so it will be very difficult for them to host more. I mean, I already talked to people that say if a major conflict happens, we most likely will try to go to Iraqi Kurdistan. But it depends also on which areas they invade. If Turkey is going to really make this buffer zone all the way until Derik, or they just want to take like Tel Abyad and Manbij or something. So it's going to be difficult to say, but I think if Turkey does that, it's going to create a huge crisis. And also I think the SDF and the YPG most likely will withdraw their forces from Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor to focus on the fight against Turkey, to defend themselves against Turkey. And in that case, ISIS would also be able to make a comeback there, a potential comeback. So that's why I think this argument by Trump that he defeated ISIS and ISIS is over, I think this is a big paradox. It's like a big idiocy, basically. So
yeah, it is idiocy. Yeah. I mean, they're still fighting in Hajin.
Yeah, they're still fighting, and the ISIS, they still have a large number of fighters. In Deir ez-Zor, this is like a desert. It's not very easy to control that. So they still have a lot of fighters in that area of there as well.
Yeah. All right, Vlad. Thank you very much, mate. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Well, also I wanted to talk something about is that also, in the past, like a lot of journalists, they were going to Syria. And actually, Rojava, or the northeast of Syria, was one of the few areas that journalists could go to without a visa, without much hassle. They would not be kidnapped. They would not be attacked. They would not have like a minder with them or something. Like you've been yourself to Syria. This is sort of sad that there were like some journalists that were always trying to undermine what was going on in the northeast of Syria, and now it's like gone. So I think it's also, there are like some journalists that were very critical of the Kurds all the time, but they were not so critical about the Turkish-backed opposition that were always kidnapping, looting, and doing a lot of plundering in the area. So I think also this narrative, should also realize that this narrative is there, and that even people that were very critical of the Kurds, they were always allowed to enter and to visit Raqqa. So all the time there was a visit, what the Kurds are doing with Raqqa, what the Kurds doing at Raqqa, they are oppressing the Arabs. And then they ignore that in Turkey, thousands of Kurds, they are oppressed. They ignore that, the Kurds, and they worked, give a lot of sacrifices to fight against ISIS. And now they're basically being dumped. So this is, a very horrible situation. And a lot of the things that the rebels were doing, for instance, now in Afrin, you almost hear nothing about that in the Western media. But, for instance, if a YPG fighter would start kidnapping Arabs and ask for $500 per person, then I'm sure it would be a huge report in some U.S. newspaper, or like The Guardian or Observer or any other newspaper. So there was really a huge lens, exaggerating everything, small thing that happened in the northeast of Syria, just because the Kurds were allies to the U.S. But if Turkey was doing something, or the rebels were doing something, often it was ignored. So that's the situation I think we are in. But now it will not matter anymore, because I remember I was in the UK Parliament talking about the situation in Syria, and then someone asked me what about the situation of Arabs in Deir ez-Zor? Are they being discriminated against by the Kurds or something like that? But now I think because Trump is withdrawing, this whole debate will be useless, because now it will be under Damascus control, most likely. So we will see what's going to happen exactly. It's still very unclear what's going to happen.
What a fucking mess. Vlad, how can people keep in touch with you on Twitter and what have you?
Well, they can just search my name on Twitter. I am on VVAN. It's like my last name basically. Mm-hmm. So you can find me there on Twitter, and also I have a page on Facebook. So I'm easily to follow there if you search my name.
All right, mate. Well, thank you very much for that, and good luck with the future.
Okay, man.
Cheers, man. Laters. Bye-bye. So that was Vlad giving us a brief idea of what's at stake for northeastern Syria, for Rojava and the YPG, now that Trump has decided to rapidly pull the US troops out of the area. To keep Popular Front moving forward, please go to patreon.com/popularfront. Consider pledging there. I was talking to my friend about this the other day. There's been nearly 150,000 unique downloads since we started in May. And even if a quarter of those downloads went onto the Patreon and were $1 a month, Popular Front could be a lot bigger. So if you like it, consider it. If you go to our youtube.com/popularfront, there's a brand new dispatch on there. We went to France, to Paris, to cover the yellow vest protests and the police brutality, the anger, the riots, all sorts of stuff there. So if you watch that, you'll see that. Please, if you like it, share it, whatever. This episode was sponsored by defensepost.com, defense with an S. It was also sponsored by Atlas News on Instagram, so that's instagram.com/Atlas News. To keep up to date with Popular Front, follow us on Twitter, that's twitter.com/popularfrontco, or follow me, that's twitter.com/Jake_Hanrahan, HANRAHAN. The website is popularfront.co. I'm hoping to get a proper website up there with articles and all sorts of stuff soon, we'll see. Instagram is @popular.front. And thank you very much to the following people. We wouldn't be able to do this without your support. Those people are Anthony Kubarik, Axel Iverson, Casey Francis, Chad Walker, Cody Bergerud, Dan Dunham, Daniel Shearer, Darby, Diana Gorvanek, Emily Molly, Fletcher Tate, James from the Discord, Joanne Stocker, Joel Tambusi, Joshua Yabut, Lawrence Abrahams, LH, Margaret Bowling, Patrick Bronte, Peter McCormack from the What Bitcoin Did podcast, Ryan Sandercock, Scott Jonesy, Stephen Adi Henderson, and Zachary Hinch, and all the friends on Willie at Discordy. Thank you very much. Music in this episode, the intro was by Home and the outro was by Son of Old. Go to his SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/son-of-old. Sun spelled S-U-N, like sun in the sky.